Okay, I'm going to try my best to explain what I want to attempt to do this school year with respect to something that I read about a knowledge gap as opposed to a student gap. So the thing that made me think was an individual test when someone gets back a 75% and then we move on. What you have to recognize is there's a gap of information that they haven't retained, and yet we move beyond that we say to ourselves, well, that's just the way it is, and then we move to the next chapter, and then these gaps build, and then before you know it, when the students in 10th, 11th, 12th grade, we can't quite comprehend why they don't have the skills, and yet to me that knowledge gap just perpetuates itself and it grows. So why does that happen, and how can we try to rectify that? So the first thing that I want to talk about is right here. I have the 21st century skills. Okay, so we need to adapt to the climate that we live in. We don't live in the 20th century anymore. We don't have to perform some of these tasks that have become automated. So it's unrealistic to ask our students to live in a 20th century world when in fact they're moving into an unprecedented world, rather matter of factly, I suppose. So these are the skills: leadership, communication, collaboration, critical thinking, creativity. And then I did put curriculum there because to me it feels that that's just the elephant that we can't avoid, that each teacher is tasked with communicating a base of information that has to support those things. So these are the 21st century skills, but in no way does that mean that, I don't see how we're going to remove trigonometry or biology or certain things that are just foundational to a school experience. So I've labeled these skills and I've labeled these credentials. And then up there I have a visual. I think the idea of a curriculum is to give us a base of information from which everything else grows. If it's more than that, then I'm often at a loss as to why we do anything that we do. You don't have to be an expert in Shakespeare. You don't have to walk around knowing the Pythagorean formula. You have to understand maybe 1 or 2% of the actual content that you're getting, but the rest is for this base knowledge that we can expand and grow from. So that is my hope. Now, what I used to be guilty of is what I would say the old model. And the old model is, well, test day is coming on Wednesday, and we're labeling it a test day, which means that this is when the information needs to be presented, and you need to demonstrate evidence of understanding, and we call that test day. And the argument for a retest would go something like this: well, why study if you're going to allow a retest? In other words, if the test is on Tuesday and you permit additional tests beyond Tuesday, well, then what would motivate a student to study for Tuesday? They would just take advantage of your retest. And that old model, what it did is it pitted student against student. And that's where these knowledge gaps were born from, is because a 75% wasn't seen as a 25% lack of knowledge. It was seen relative to the 95% that another student earned. And we can't allow an additional test because that wouldn't be fair to the person that earned the 95%. So that's the old model. But again, the old model worked under this idea of one particular test day. Well, when you reframe the model under why study if you're not going to retain it, that sort of speaks to these 21st century skills, that if we want to be creative, if we want to be a critical thinker, if we want to collaborate, communicate, and have leadership, we have to grow this base of knowledge. And growing a base of knowledge in no way recognizes the other people in the room. It doesn't matter what they know, it matters what I know. So to grow this base of knowledge so we can become a 21st century person that can function in the real world, the new model has to be, why study if you're not going to retain it? In other words, why even offer the test on a Tuesday if it's not information worth knowing? Okay, so this idea of the Ebbinghaus forgetting curve was something that really hit home with me. And so what this says is, in order to retain information, it's critical that we are allowed to forget that information. And an absolutely incredible idea, that if in order to retain it, you have to be allowed to forget it. And the idea here is if you offer a first test, the next day and subsequently every day after that, your knowledge starts to fall. And it falls rather fast. It's rather a precipitous drop after that first test. Well, then once you retest, maybe a week later, now when you retest and you ask the brain to retrieve that information that it's lost, it works hard and it becomes a little bit more sticky in the brain that you had to go retrieve it. So after you offer that second test, now your rate of forgetting doesn't fall as fast. And then the same is true every subsequent time. Every time you do it again, it doesn't fall as fast. So I've started working on a 3-test model where I don't really lock in a grade until after that third test. Now, that idea of a grade causes some concern for me, and it should for others too, because that grade can oftentimes undermine learning altogether. And there's lots of research out there that substantiates that. Daniel Pink is one of my favorite guys to study. But so here's what I want to do this year, and how I want to try to formulate this. So I want every student to have a T1, T2, and T3, and I want them to know in advance what it is they're required to understand. Okay, so these are all the skills that you have to demonstrate some level of competency. I'm not a big mastery fan, because not everyone wants to be a master at every task. There are some things that people just want. In all honesty, give me a 70%, let me move on. I want to demonstrate the most basic level of understanding, and I need to recognize that. The last thing I want to do is tell them what they should place preference over in their life. But if you're in this class, you need to at least demonstrate some level of competency. So what I would do is, this T1 would be a basic competency. Okay, you've demonstrated it once. I know you're going to forget it, but I'm not going to ask anything else of you. And many students are comfortable with that. They're comfortable with a one-time show, and that would just earn some basic level of understanding. But others aren't comfortable with that. So what I do is I wait a week and then I offer it again, and then that improves their grade a little bit, and they're comfortable with that. It's what they want. And then in order to get full credit or mastery, they'd have to demonstrate it on a third test. And if this was 1 week, I often had this 2 weeks. Now, is it ideal? Is a 3-week gap ideal? Probably not. I mean, your research would probably tell you it needs to be more than 3 weeks. But and it could be, but that's the minimum distance that I'm after. And they could always test for that third. Now, how does this work? Like, what's the nuts and bolts behind this? Like, how does your class function with this kind of model? So, in my perfect world, what my class looks like is, and I don't know if you can see this, but it says open, closed, collaborative, closed, and that's what I think is ideal for student-teacher interaction. So, open means when they walk in, it's there's nothing structured. It's not like a get to work right away. And the reason why I want that is because I want it to be open because of what they may have done that evening. Okay, so If we want our students to show up inquisitive with questions, that's the perfect world stuff. They walk in and they drive the understanding. So if I have a closed beginning, that means that their questions can't really be entertained to the best of my ability. So I want this to be an open setting where they walk in and they're like, Mr. Wagner, can we talk about? Absolutely, we can talk about that. So this first thing is open, and look, they often don't have questions, and open is often about me walking around, getting to know them, finding out their willingness to do something today. Are they exhausted from something else? Is something else weighing on their mind? How much can I get from them? So this whole idea of open, I think, is really critical for growth and development on a daily basis. After that open period of time, I'm going to do a closed period of time. That means like I need time here to address something, and it might have been a student led question. It might be something that I think would help them, but it's my time, and that means it's not going to be super long, maybe 15 minutes at the most. But if I give them open and they've got a dialogue going on with their girlfriend or a coach or an employer or some sort of cell phone activity, like they usually can grant me this time when I grant them the open time. So then we go close and I communicate something, and then collaborative, which could be me and a student. It could be a student and a student. It could be anything where we're trying to make progress on something, whether it's curriculum based or whether it's project based. I'm really looking for ideas on projects, but this collaborative idea should be move in some direction, be productive with something. And then I'll close class with a close time, basically saying, hey, if you have time tonight and this is what you want to do, if you're interested in continuing and moving in a positive direction, this is where I think you could go and be productive. And now that requires this idea of asynchronous, right? Is this we have Schoology, and what am I putting out there where they can actively get after? Okay, this would be like the YouTube example, or anything that they can go actively gauge and get information. So I think the new model is provide resources for them to access in the evening instead of giving them things to do in the evening for us, right? We want to give them a broad scope because maybe this student wants to study for their second test, and maybe this student wants to work on their project. And that's the idea of this student driven model where they own a lot of this stuff. So this asynchronous, and the other thing I really believe sort of like shuts thing down in its track is this idea of skill building over in the evening hours. And what we really have to be careful of is this idea of work to be done for a grade when they show up. Because what happens is if it's for a grade, one of two things: if it's graded on correctness, now they care more about the answer than the process, and they're not willing to take risks. And if the answer is really really important, they'll use photo map or whatever that's called, and they'll deceive us. They'll cheat us just to get the answers. They'll reach out for help, and they won't understand the process. Um, so that's if you're grading it on correctness, and if you're grading it on completeness, to be truthful, it doesn't have any bearing. I mean, it's grade inflation at its core. It's that here's work to do. It doesn't have to be done well, and I'll give you a grade for it. I mean, and I know why we do that. We do that because we offer these one moment in time tests that have a tendency to really hurt someone's grade, and then we elevate their grade with these homeworks. But then we're not really developing the student holistically. Like it seems self-evident that they wouldn't be prepared for like an SAT or a keystone exam, right? So this whole idea of homework has to be a skill building model, not a graded model. And then if they're willing to take risks and they're willing to build skills and they don't understand something, it isn't this, oh my God, I have to finish it so it's complete, or I have to copy it so it's correct. Rather, what happens then is that then meshes with this in-class experience where they walk in and they can lead with a question in this open. Like, Mr. Reiner, I didn't understand this, and I've never understood it. Can you help me with that? Yes, I can. You take that question and you say, when we go to collaborative time, I'll make sure I help. And then what happens is that the interaction is it's very relationship driven. It's Maggie, I'll be with you in a second, and yes, Stephen, I'm going to hit you in a second. I know you've got a different question, but they're driving it, and if you give them the stuff out in front of what they're responsible for, I think we all like that. I think that's human nature, to know what's out ahead of you, to see the entire scope of what you're responsible for, and then work at it at your convenience instead of this wait and see, be surprised by what when things are due model. So um, I'm still trying to work out some of the kinks. Right here under their time, I wrote age of convenience. That's sort of what I'm talking about with the YouTube model. It's that we live in the 21st century. We can hit pause, rewind, fast forward. Things are moving at their speed, and if we don't honor the fact that students are at different levels of maturity and different speeds of learning, we're really going to handicap certain students. Certainly, we're going to handicap the fast ones, and we're going to handicap the slower ones. So this is my model. This is what I'm attempting to pull off. We'll see how it goes.